Okay. All right, welcome back. It's just past 3:00 here at General and Housing, and we're here with Representative Kevin Coach Christie. Coach, I think this is the first time you've been in our committee this year. And so we're just gonna go around the circle for those of us who are here. Representative Stevens from Washington Chittenden. Representative Higley, we're just going around the circle in case you don't know any of us. Serving the Washington Chittenden District.
Sadia Lamont, Lemoyne, Washington District.
Ashley Barley, Fairfax and Georgia.
Caleb Elder, Bristol, Starksboro, Moncton. That's 3 out of 4. That's good.
I hate the
Lincoln.
multiples, you
Lincoln.
know.
Dennis Savani, Linden, Newark, Sheffield, Greenlock, and
Sutton.
Linden.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows. I represent Windsor One, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
And I'm Larry Labor. I represent Essex, Orleans, District 1. And I have 12 of them, and I'll spare you.
Yeah, it was always fascinating, you know, with our colleagues that would have anything over 2, you know, and you just go, oh, wow, man. And to have to go to that many meetings, you know, just, yeah.
Robin, Chestnut, Tantrum, Middletown Springs, Paulette, Tinmouth, Wells, and Rupert.
So welcome to the General and Housing Committee. We're just here to hear your sponsorship. And when we pick up the bill, if we pick up the bill later in the session, we'll get a walkthrough of it. But we'd love to get your thoughts on H363.
You know, as you know, Kevin Coach Christie, Hartford, and Hartford has 5 villages, so I'll dispense with the villages. This came from a parent who shared a story with me that someone at school clipped her child's hair. And we never got it, you know, a clear understanding of how it happened. If it was a student, we have a feeling that it was during one of the activity periods, you know, when they had access to, you know, to scissors. It was an elementary student. So, you know, when our parents told us not to run with scissors, some kids weren't instructed not to use them on your fellow students either, you know, so that's kind of a prelude to bringing it up in general around people not understanding ethnic and cultural differences in hairstyles or hair coverings, you know, and then treating them disrespectfully. You know, it would be if there was a certain garb that was worn traditionally by anyone, you know, that's their tradition, you know, and a person should be able to express his or her traditions without any form of discrimination. And what we're seeing in other places more actively is especially, you know, children who are displaying, you know, dreads or traditional Eastern headgear, being asked to either remove the headgear or in some cases, you know, actually, you know, having their hair cut while at school, you know, and I've seen with doing a little more research that in some employment situations, you know, people say, well, you can't wear that. You can wear the If it's a company, you can wear our, you know, hat or hair covering, but you can't wear your own, you know, those kinds of things. So this bill actually addresses all of that, you know, not just, you know, the hairstyle, you know, but, you know, hair coverings, you know, as well. That would be the goal, you know, in the long term, you know, with the bill. So that's the Cliff Notes, you know, version, you know, of it. I would imagine if, you know, if you are able to, you know, to take it up and look at it in a little more depth, we could look at, you know, the different types of witnesses you might want to bring forward to further the cause of understanding.
And we're dealing with, as I mentioned earlier, S-103, what we were looking at, which is that we have a small pile of discrimination-oriented bills, and this is one of them. We'll have, you know, walk through and then a further understanding. And we'll move forward with it when we can.
Thank you for this, Representative Christie. Hard to say. My reading of this is actually that it's much narrower than you're discussing. And because it says race includes this, and if I think of something like a hijab or a yarmulke, that's not racial, that's religious or cultural, but not racial. And so I see this as being very narrower and not including hair coverings or religious or cultural practices. I'm sorry, it does include.
I guess it can be as broad as we need it to be. I'm originally thinking this is the direct problem, the first problem or the first incident that we would deal with more directly here in Vermont. But I've also heard of some of the other situations as well. So I'm going like, you know, if we're going to protect people, we need to protect people in general, you know. The narrower focus is because that was most recent. If I did more research, I could bring you cases of them all. But it's just, you know, that's what sparked or generated, that was the genesis of the bill itself initially. But since doing the bill, it was like, oh, man. You know, it's more pervasive than it looks like on the surface, you know, than just the narrow description.
So the intent is to be broader than my reading of it.
It could be. As we know, it's a committee, you know, like determination, you know, like how far do you feel you can go with the witnesses you're able to bring forward, and then, you know, getting it across the finish line, you know, too. You know, do you stay with a narrow approach or do you go with a broader approach and get more people and wait until, you know, the next half the biennium to start working on, let's say, a broader perspective, you know, so. But there's any number of different strategies, you know, you might elicit, you know, to get to the end goal. So, possibilities.
Representative Lamont.
So, and this would cover also students in schools. I'm assuming it would be a discrimination practice in general. So not even students, but educators as well.
Yeah.
As far as all of those things. And I just mentioned that because, that is a thing that happens currently in our school system, hair discrimination and bullying and things like that of both students and staff members around these issues is still very rampant. And I just attended a conference this weekend, and to see so many little Muslim students with their hijab on. I stopped practicing I stopped covering when I was 12. before I came to Vermont. And I tell them, you know, I'm so proud to see them continue their practice and not let society and societal norms like stop them from doing what they feel they need to do. And you know, when my daughter was in preschool, I picked her up one day, she had a sign on that said, "Please don't touch my hair." It was a stop sign. It said, "Please don't touch my hair." And she's wearing this around her neck. So of course I'm livid because I show up and I'm like, "What is going on?" right? And so, but it turns out it was her idea. My little 3-year-old was sick of all the children touching her hair and came up with, you know, she's like, "I don't mind, put the sign on. I just don't want them to touch me anymore." And so, you know, it's interesting that this is something that would seem trivial, right? It would seem from, you know, you're like, it's hair, it's not that big of a deal. However, the impact that it has on students and teachers and people who go into the workplace or wherever they are can be significant. So thank you for bringing this forth.
All right. Coach, if I may call you coach. Representative Christie, thank you so much for coming in today.
Right. You know, at first I was thinking it was the other bill we were working on, you know, so I had that one out first, you know, because that was the one we had stuck. But then the Senate bill that matches, you know, that bill is coming over. So you're going to be doing that one too. So, you know, we can kind of see the nexus on that one, you know.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Have a good rest of your afternoon. Back to
your grant.
yeah, right. The healthcare bill, you know, we're working on that one. That's interesting.
Hey Ron, will you send me the Zoom link so I can write down the else?
Got it. Take
Next
care.
time.
See you on the next one.
Yep. Thanks, Coach.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jean. All righty, Representative Higley. Please join us now. Do you know us all?
I do now.
We took the opportunity to just have two of our discrimination-oriented bills, just yours and Coach's, to be brought forward as a sponsorship introduction. So, well,
Hey, I appreciate this. For the record, Representative Mark Higley, I represent the new Orleans Lamoille District. So it's 8 towns. Originally, I represented Lowell, J. Westfield, Troy, and the town of Eden, which is my Lamoille County town. And then I picked up with Mike Marcotte, Coventry, Irisburg, and Newport Town. So it's 8 towns altogether. And I actually made it to 6 of the town meetings out of 8, so
how do you get along with your new district mate?
good.
Like,
Yeah.
rare. Oh, I'm just sorry. I get along fine with Representative Wood, thank you.
So again, this is an anti-discrimination bill. It's actually been around. It was here last biennium under H 573. And as you can imagine, things are changing across the country in regards to this. So what it basically does is proposes to prohibit discrimination in employment and public accommodations on the basis of an individual's immunization status. I'm sure we've all got folks that have said to us at one time or another, you know, there's no way I'm going to get a shot for one reason or another, whether it's religious, whether it's a medical reason, whether it's a conscientious reason, whatever it might be. And maybe you've also heard some of these people talk about, in particular, their employment concerns as far as employers that have kind of doubled down on whether or not they could work or what the conditions they could work under this. So really what this bill does is it puts into all the categories in regards to public accommodations, unfair housing practices, and employment, unlawful employment practices. It just adds that word immunization status. It is spelled out in the definitions as to what that is. And I think it's important maybe to give you a little flair of what's out there. Some of the states, matter of fact, Georgia had a particular bill that was sunsetted, and they just recently put it completely into law, removed the sunset and put it into law. But I can also understand from some, in particular, like Montana, where they've worked on some exceptions and exemptions. So what they talk about in their exceptions and exemptions are licensed nursing homes, long-term care facilities, and assisted living facilities are exempt from the law if complying with it would result in the facility violating regulations or guidances promulgated by the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services or the CDC Control and Prevention. Montana's is pretty much follows along the same lines as this. Under the law, businesses, government entities, and places of public accommodations may not refuse to serve or withhold goods from any person based on the person's vaccination status or whether the person has an immunity passport. That's another term that's out there a lot now, is immunity passport. Likewise, employers may not discriminate against or refuse to employ an individual based on whether the person has been vaccinated or possesses that immunity passport. And then maybe if I can just, again, give you a little flair for, there's 13 states currently that have similar provisions, and they kind of vary a little bit. Arizona, the bans applies to employers except for healthcare. Again, they've taken out that healthcare exemption. They're permitted to, but they are not mandated to. And even under those guidelines, they're required to provide reasonable accommodations for anyone who is unvaccinated. Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, theirs is a ban. The scope is only on state entities, and it doesn't address the private sector. So again, for whatever reason, they started out with just state entities that they have more control over, I'm assuming, and didn't reach out into the private sector. Florida, they went in a different direction too, in the sense that it includes all private and public employers, and the employers who violate the ban, they face quite a substantial fee of $10,000 per employee violation. Again, Montana, I just explained that. Again, they have a healthcare exemption. New Hampshire generally bans the mandate of vaccines as a condition of employment unless a direct threat exists, and that it cannot be addressed by other means or reasonable accommodations. Tennessee, same thing, talks about just state entities at this time. Texas bans, their ban includes all private and public employers. And so, yeah, so there's 13 other states that could be looked at that currently, have this, and if ever looking for information as to how it affects employment or individuals that are requesting or are not having the current vaccinations, how it affects them and so on. So there's information out there. But that's really about it. It's again, something that's been happening across the country, and I think it's another avenue to stop the discrimination here in Vermont.
I apologize, I haven't read the whole bill. I have read the first couple of pages of it. But does it not withstand, so to speak, the laws that are in place regarding children's vaccinations, immunizations?
My understanding, it does not state that anywhere. Yep. And it also falls under current current penalties and enforcement that are currently under all those other categories that I spelled out there?
Those stand.
I'm sorry?
Those stand.
Yes, yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that, under the penalties piece, it's basically 21 VSA 495B, which talks about, it's unfair act in commerce. That's under actual 9 VSA 2458 to 2461. But it talks about under the enforcement, the Attorney General, the state's attorney may enforce by restraining or prohibiting acts, seeking civil penalties and obtaining assurances of discontinuance. So it's not, that to me is not super strict compared to, I think it was Florida that had a $10,000 fine for addressing each violation.
Yes, sir.
So I look forward to having some good discussions with you about this.
Yeah.
My first big floor speech was to try to keep the philosophical exemption for that time it was measles vaccination. But what I'm struggling with here is that the list of things that you can't discriminate for, nothing else is potentially contagious. And this is public health as opposed to the other categories that are protected. And so I think it's a different lens we need to use there and open to discussion.
Thank you for that. And so I was on GovOps back when that philosophical exemption was removed. Mm-hmm. You may remember Cheryl Hanna from Vermont Law School, who was a constitutional law attorney, came in at the time and said that it would be unconstitutional for you to remove the philosophical without removing the religious. And I always remember that. So, if you take her words to heart, that shouldn't have happened. And so that's where I stand on that one. And as far as, the contagious piece of it, there are provisions. I mean, I read another article from the Society for Human Resources Management talking about certain accommodations. And again, looking at employers that, should consider employees' morale issues as well in regards to a lot of this stuff. So I think there's a lot going on here. And it's these other states are doing it. So again, I'd like to maybe, it hasn't been a long time, but it'd be interesting to see what they're finding in regards to that, as far as what is that actual health risk and how are they mitigating that,
Just thinking that if I am unimmunized and have measles, and potentially a health risk to other people, I should stay home. But if I don't, people could catch measles from me. People can't catch age from me, or race, or gender. Those are, so it's different. Seems to me it's a different discussion than the other things that we're.
And I guess there's
discrimination
right
based on, but
there's, as you know, since the pandemic, there's been a lot of back and forth in regards to, what the CDC's recommendations are and haven't been, and back and forth. It's interesting and open-ended, and again, like I said, there's enough folks out there that have had a real issue with it that's hurt them financially and otherwise. I think it's good for consideration.
I always have a little pet peeve that tetanus is a required vaccination. I think people should get vaccinated because it's a horrible disease, but it's not contagious. It's an individual health risk, not a public health risk, to the best of my knowledge.
Right. Well, especially being in the contracting business, I make sure my tetanus shot is up to date.
Right.
I don't want to step on a rusty nail somewhere.
Yeah.
But thanks. Yep.
Sorry, I didn't mean to monopolize the floor,
That's all right.
but a little sorry.
Your questions?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to present it and talk about it.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
All right. Moving on to S100. Tag teaming senators?
We are, we're a team. We're the Sausage Twins. I'll get the folding chair over there. I can get that, Ron.
You can, but
Perfectly capable.
we're here to,
Okay, Wendy. Not sure everybody knows when. Well,
Yeah,
we
I
don't
was
know
here.
all of you.
Wendy was
The
here.
other day.
Technician on the movie set, no one else is allowed to fluff pillows.
Senator
You are divine.
Senator Clarkson, I believe this is your first visit to this committee this year?
I use your refrigerator on a regular basis. Is this my first official visit? Yes. It is a joy to be here.
I'm not sure I like that.
I'm so thrilled with your refrigerator. I don't use it that often. And I mark my things with my name, so you can always throw it out.
Yeah, it does explain how much smaller the refrigerator is.
No, not fair.
So we're just gonna go around, this would be a new to you committee. Representative Stevens from Waterbury, Representative Waterbury, Bolton, Huntington, and Niels Gore.
Sadia Lamont, and I represent Morristown, Elmore, Worcester, Woodbury, and the northern part of Stowe.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax, and Georgia.
Caleb Elder from Starksboro.
Dennis LaBounty, Linden, Sutton, Newark, Sheffield, Wheelock.
I'm Elizabeth Burrows and I represent Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
I'm Larry Labor. I represent Essex Orleans District 1.
I'm Mary Howard and I represent Rutland District 6.
Robin Chestnut Tangerman, Paulette, Middletown Springs, Rupert, Wells, and Tinmouth.
Wendy Harrison, and I'm the Wyndham District Senator. So that's mostly Wyndham County. And I live in Brattleboro.
And she and Nada are the hot team from Wyndham County. Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Now, we're having you in here on S100. I see it up on the board and there's two things that's.
Well, you
This
could.
is as introduced.
As introduced.
So.
That
let's
is a
just
waste
use-
of your time.
Yes, let's just use that as a piece of,
Well, actually, it's not, because remember, it was a committee bill. So it is,
we're just gonna use it as wallpaper because,
Okay.
I mean, as far as today is concerned, there's two things, one of which is that it's 53 pages long. And second, basically, we're just asking you for the broad
big picture.
overview because we've been hearing about it. We've participated in the conversations in the hallways. We know that this has been a work in progress since January and that perhaps as early as this afternoon, there may be a posted unofficial version from the Senate. I guess it takes a little while to get whatever.
Marry all the pieces.
Yeah, right. So whatever is in the bill, I had anyway, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to give us an idea now of pretty much what ended up in the bill. We can find out what didn't end up in the bill as time goes on, but this is going to be the main focus of our work for the next couple of weeks. And we just wanted to get this introduction. We'll have a walkthrough in two pieces over the next 2 days. I think we'll be dealing mostly with housing and the housing portions of the bill, and energy and environment. We'll likely be doing most of the zoning stuff that's been anticipated.
So one of the challenges with this bill, as you will know, in a committee that shares a jurisdiction, as housing does with Act 250, and you'll be doing the same balancing act we did. Well, you'll be experiencing this. So I would say overarching, and then Wendy is going to take the municipal zoning sections in the Act 250, and I'll take the other sections, but we're going to just do very high
Yeah,
level.
let's go 30,000 feet.
We're going to do 30,000 feet, but I would just preface this by saying, as we know, for the last 2.5 years, we have been able to appropriate over $400 million into new housing for a range of incomes, from mixed income, low income, middle income. And supportive recovery, and just a whole range of housing that we've been able to really spend money we've never had before. This bill really begins to address, even though it appropriates $90 million, although, as you know, all stripped out by our appropriations committee, this bill really begins to address the barriers, not financial barriers, but the barriers we have created in our own right through zoning, through regulation, through permitting. And so it begins to get at some of the barriers to housing that we have created. So I would say that's sort of an overall picture of what this bill does, even though we do appropriate a lot of money, more money than we would have thought possible 5 years ago. So I would say that sort of that tees it up. And our final work, which was voted out of the Senate last week, really was a balancing act between driving density into our designated downtowns, village centers, and growth centers, and trying to protect undeveloped areas in our towns. And that is a balancing act we have to play. We have to work with that. One of the reasons this is a functional legislature is that we compromise. And so the final product wasn't necessarily everything everybody wanted, but we compromised enough to get it to you so that you guys can do the good work the House always does on your bills. So, because we're, now that I'm in the Senate, I envy the time that we spend in the House really digging deep into things. So we are shepherding our work thus far to you. And
Okay.
Begin the high level.
Good introduction. And as Senator Clarkson said, what we tried to do was to balance conservation and development. And we heard from over 100 witnesses, and I think you'll have our witness list. We heard from folks about how impactful the crisis is, the housing crisis is. And then we also heard from folks, developers from towns, about constraints as they see it. So my background is in local government, so I'm going to be talking about the local government impacts. And what we did, the bill has 40 sections and a lot of very specific items in it. So I do have to go to a little bit of a granular level or else I won't be able to talk about anything. So like, for example, Section 1 deals with parking requirements. And what we found in many cases is that parking requirements that are too high, that require too much parking, especially in redevelopment, those can cause redevelopment projects to not occur. So buildings that need to be redeveloped don't get redeveloped because there's too much parking required by municipalities. And I've seen that in my experience. So what we did was we said that municipalities cannot require more than one parking space per unit. Now, the developer can provide more parking spaces per unit. And we also added a provision that under certain circumstances, they can require 1.5 parking spaces per unit. We talked a lot about this, so you probably will too. But I think we came to a good point. You round up with the 1.5. Many towns have no parking requirements. Some have parking maximums because they've found that parking has been such an issue. Is it okay if I stop for questions?
Yeah.
Or
in your discussion on parking, did you talk about disability parking?
Not specifically. No, we didn't. Oh, the size, that's a whole, that might be a transportation. It should, right. No, we talked about numbers of spaces required in terms of how they restrict redevelopment primarily of housing, but also new housing. But one really important thing to stress is that the developer or the owner can provide as much parking as they want. We just don't want the town to be an impediment, because some towns actually have used that as a way to restrict redevelopment.
May I just tag on to this? We're having a public hearing next Wednesday on supportive housing and mental health and disability supportive housing with health and welfare. And where there may be some that's built with the HCB money here, that I would say that major issue, Elizabeth, is dealt with. We're probably going to need to add to. So we're beginning to dig deeper into supportive housing next Wednesday.
Where is it?
I don't know yet. We just scheduled it. I don't know. The committee says, I'll let you know.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so then.
Oh, it may not be a public hearing. It may just be the committees and listening to experts. It's not a public meeting, i.e. like 5 to 7. It's like part of the committee.
Oh, okay, no worries. Okay, so back to municipalities. One other major change that we made was that single-family zoning now must allow duplexes. Anywhere where a single-family home is permitted, you need to allow duplexing. And that was in Representative Baumgart's bill. That was an essential part. And we heard testimony from the state of Maine. They have also, everybody has a housing crisis. And that's the one thing they did. And they're pretty confident it's going to make a big difference. So just allowing that, we think that's really important. It's also a way that the folks who are already there can have some additional income and stay in place, because we did try to look at all of the various aspects. Like, for example, there are older people who don't want to move out of their house, and it's better for all of us if people age in place. That's an impediment to others moving into their homes. So if we can have duplexes, then that adds those homes. So we were pretty excited about the duplexes, and we didn't get any pushback on that I recall. The duplex requirement would also take effect this year, July 1, 2023. So that's something that would be impactful almost immediately. The other municipal changes are delayed until the following year, December 2024, just to give the towns time to plan. One of those, and this is a big one, towns need to allow multi-unit dwellings with up to 5 units per acre in areas served by water and sewer. Because we know, developers know it's very difficult to develop a project of any significant size without water and sewer. So, and that water and sewer is a public investment. You know, people aren't building that with all private money. So because of those things, and because that's the appropriate place to put more dense development, we did have that as in the bill. Now, we had a lot of discussion about what are appropriate places where water and sewer is, because there are some places where you have water and sewer where you wouldn't want multi-unit development. Like, for example, between the main part of a development and an industrial park. I know one of those extensions. Because the water and sewer goes there, it doesn't mean you necessarily want to have housing there. So we did put in language where the town and or the regional commission can help define what is appropriate water and sewer. So that would have big impacts, requiring those additional 5 units per acre. We did some, I'm going to skip over some homeless shelter, unless somebody wants me to talk about that. Okay, there have been situations where towns have either prohibited or very much restricted shelters by restricting their modes of operation or their hours of operation. We put in language to say that they can't do that. We said emergency shelter, which is a homeless shelter, can be regulated in town zoning, but bylaws cannot limit their daily and seasonal hours of operation. And we thought that's important. We had the largest surge of homelessness in the country, but now we also have the largest percentage of folks who are housed, which we think is important, obviously. And then definitions can be very important. We had definitions for accessory dwelling unit, duplex, emergency shelter, and multi-unit or multi-family dwelling. ADUs are another great way to improve the density and the amount of units without a lot of impact. And so we further defined ADUs as subordinate to the main house and not more than 900 square feet. and they can be detached, and you probably know they're already allowed statewide. When we talk about Act 250, it gets very
Want to talk about the
heated.
appeals.
But that's what I was gonna talk about, the appeals, is it's not just the cost of the process, but the appeals are really where we hear the main hurdles to development, because the appeals are unpredictable and they can go for many, many months. If a developer has done Act 250s before, they can typically get through in 4 months. It really can be done if you know what you're doing. But the appeals are what kick you out and make it really challenging. So we put language in for both appeals on Act 250 and appeals to local zoning. So the Act 250 appeal is in section 9, and what it is that it says that the character of an area can't be appealed, because the character is the aspect of the law, of the regulation that is most usually used in cases of when people just don't want folks there or development there. And what we did was we said, if the town has determined that a development will not result in an undue adverse effect of the character of the area, that specific decision cannot be appealed. And we found that that is the kind of decision that often is appealed in the kind of nuisance type appeals, where there's an appeal and it doesn't win, it's overturned. So we put that in section 9 as part of the Act 250. We put it in section 6 as part of the town review. Hold on, I'm sorry. No, that was in section 7. Oh gosh.
Not section.
No, it was section
Section 6.
6, sorry. Where we changed the existing law to initially, our committee took out the ability of any 10 voters to appeal a zoning decision. But then with the Natural Resources Committee, we changed that to be that the 10 people needed a particularized interest, and that the character of the area could not be used as a reason. So it gets a little convoluted, but those two changes change the nature of the appeals on both the local level and the state level, which is important. And then I want to give just one more note about this, which is by right zoning. We established by right zoning, which I wasn't even sure what we were talking about initially, because it's such a interesting topic. Because what has happened evidently is that some towns in the review process have required either more or less. They've gone beyond the code in requirements for particular developments. Possibly not intentionally, we didn't talk about that, but what we put into our bill, and it stayed, is that you can't go beyond the zoning that is established. So if you're a property owner and you have a right to put a certain size house on a certain size lot, the town can't make you do either more or less than you're entitled to. It's basically property rights. And that's really important, because we should be abiding by the code as towns. And this makes sure that we do. And towns we heard from appreciated this language, because sometimes it can be difficult when you're on a DRB or other review board and your neighbor wants to do something and you have to tell them no. Now you can say, oh, state made me, I have to go by the code. So I think that one's really important. And we got some very good feedback early on about that one. So and then there's some data requirements, because we did find that it's very hard to find good data on housing. Housingdata.org is a wonderful site that the
encourage you all to
VHFA maintains, but we need better data. So we did put in language that towns and regional commissions both need to have housing goals in their plans. And they need to be consistent. So I think those are the highlights of sections 1 through 21.
And I had the sections of the bill that are lots of great programs building on things we already know and love. So I had sections 22 through 44. And I was just reminded that in reviewing them, how terrific some of them are, and how many of these things that we have been working on. But we have some new ones, which I think we're all really thrilled with, the preventing eviction. So, we've gone through the whole Vermont eviction, the VRAP program of how we try and keep renters in their houses. And this is a slightly different way of getting at it. It's called the Eviction Rescue Plan. And it is, it's something it's called the Eviction Rescue Fund, and it's designated to prevent evictions. It appropriates $2.5 million to really fix the problems that may cause evictions. So let's say there's been a domestic violence and somebody puts a hole in the wall and it just doesn't get fixed and it's part of the cause of eviction. If that fund could pay to get that wall fixed and prevent an eviction, that is great, because we spend a bomb once people are unhoused. It's much more expensive to have people unhoused than it is to fix the eviction. But we have a whole bunch of things. We address the low-hanging fruit, building on VHIP, our wonderful Vermont Housing Improvement Program, which, as we know, funds up to $50,000 in renovation of vacant, blighted, non-code compliant, or unweatherized units. That and our ADU, our accessory dwelling unit program. We add money for navigators, for housing navigators in this bill for our regional planning commissions. And, there's just a whole range of things that we do in these sections. We prohibit future deed restrictions and covenants that require minimum dwelling unit size. That's another sort of key piece of not excluding non-discriminatory work and more than one parking space. And because municipalities aren't required to maintain Class 4 roads, often they're not noted, we require in a section that those be disclosed at the point of sale. The duplicative permitting got obliterated in the Natural Resources Amendment, so I'm not going to chat about that. It seems sort of random, but it's very tied often to housing. We add a litigator to the Human Rights Commission because BOR is completely overwhelmed. So we appropriate a bunch of money to add a litigator for her, because a lot of what she does is housing discrimination and housing issues. We just high level, the Eviction Rescue Fund I've just talked about. We've added a lot of money for HIP and ADUs. We also expand the home sharing opportunities throughout the state. It's not a lot of money, but we're hoping that this $200,000 that we've appropriated, that we can roll out. We have two sort of competing home share programs, but again, that's the third piece of low-hanging fruit: ADUs, VHIP, and home share. Immediately, we hope, or relatively quickly, can add more housing, add more housing for more people. Our mobile home parks, as this committee knows very well, desperately in need of some infrastructure work for the private and public owners. And we add money for home repair in the individual mobile homes, but also to provide assistance for the home owners for the home park owners, and directs them to do DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and CVOEO to report on the infrastructure needs that are needed in the parks around the state, which is, from what we can understand, huge. So we need to begin, just like we have to deal with school construction, we really have to deal with some infrastructure needs in our mobile home park communities. In we've also, there's some pieces on the first generation home buyer program that are in here. And the other big new program, which, I hate to keep adding programs, but we've added to the middle income, the missing middle program, we've added money to do that. And which your committee was very involved with last year, as was ours. We repealed the session law and we put the missing middle home ownership pilot program in, and we codify it into law, and we appropriate quite a bit of money, and we expand the demographic and geographic reach of the program, and hopefully we will. This has been a terrific program, and we add a new program called the Rental Revolving Loan Fund, which is designed to really address, it's been requested by just so many employers who are desperately in need of housing new employees and their workforce. And right now they're feeling that they're just feeling there isn't enough rental housing for middle income people. And this is a revolving fund that would hopefully help employers, and it would provide loans for housing developers who want to build apartments that are rented to households who wouldn't qualify for traditional affordable housing rentals. So this would be from 65 to 150% of area median income, and that's about $40,000 to $110,000 of income for a household. So this could be for some of our entrepreneurs who are building housing for their employees because there just isn't any housing that they can find in their neck of the woods. And I don't know, what am I missing? I think that's a lot of what the sections I dealt with.
Let me add what we did on the floor, the amendment.
Yes, and I think we should go to the amendment.
On
right.
The amendment. There were a couple of amendments.
Well, let's tee up the issue, which you may have heard that we changed. Well, it's your section, so why don't you tee up what we did and then what we ended up doing.
Right. In our committee, we had. Well, actually, let me get to where natural resources was, because it got complicated. We looked for ways to focus housing on the designated areas, and I'm sure y'all are familiar with the designated areas. The first compromise that came out between our committee and natural resources was the 10 unit. No, the 25. Yeah, I'm going to get confused because we went back and forth.
So currently,
but I want to end up where we are.
Let's go with where we are.
So what we ended up agreeing to last week was to add to the current study that's happening with Act 250, because we had a lot of back and forth on how we should change Act 250. We had time limits that are still there. There's a 3-year time limit to get a permit, and then that permit would be valid for 3 more years. But the amount that you could build under that permit was the issue. And we ended up at the lower number. But we also ended up with adding a subject to the Act 250 study that's going on this year. And what that study is going to look at, in addition to the other things, and it's going to be complete by the end of 2023, is whether increasing jurisdictional thresholds for housing development up to 25 units would impact housing affordability, especially for primary home ownership, and what the potential impact of increasing those thresholds to 25 units would have on natural and community resources addressed under existing Act 250 criteria. And so we ended up not allowing, in my opinion, excess development in all places where towns had zoning. That was the issue, was towns with zoning versus the designated areas. And so we stayed with the designated areas, which I think was the right thing to do, because those areas are where development should occur.
And in terms of Act 250, we also expanded the priority housing projects and expanded the amount they could be built in our designated areas. So we've lifted the caps on some of those, and we, there's actually a lot we've done in driving density in the areas that are appropriate. We've also enabled an enhancement of village centers. But I think after doing this bill, I'm going to work really hard on our town to do a neighborhood development area, which we don't have, which I think all of us need around particularly our village centers, which are actually often very small. One of the concerns is that the designated areas are it's not a lot of the land in our state. On the other hand, it's the land, it is the places we have water and sewer. It is the appropriate places. It's where there's better transportation, and people are wanting very much to live in those centers. And I think the challenge we faced with the amendment that we turned into an additional piece of the NRB study is that until we can qualify how we build 25 units, we were just building 25 units anywhere in town, and all the town had to do was have zoning and bylaws. So I think we feel pretty good in the place we landed. We're driving density into the areas we think are appropriate. We are, I think we've done reasonably good work. And
another thing that we did do was there's a new process for towns to be able to be exempt from Act 250, because I think this is really important, because there are towns who can administer Act 250. There are towns who have bylaws very similar or provide as much protection as Act 250, but we don't have a good process for delegating to them. We established a process that it's not perfect, but it's a start, where there would be something called an enhanced designation area, and the town would apply to the Natural Resources Board to get that designation. And the NRB would draft model bylaws the towns may adopt. I still think it's a little too cumbersome, more cumbersome than it could be. But we did run out of time to craft the perfect solution. So that's something this committee may want to look at.
We leave a lot to you. So the next stage in this work is with all of you. And the NRB, I would just remind all of us that the Natural Resources Board, which oversees Act 250, is in the process of reviewing and updating a lot of their work. And I think we all want to engage with them on this more fully. And this amendment certainly adds to their work. But at the same time, we're also reviewing all our designations. And the Department of Housing and Community Development is doing that work, because the designated areas have kind of grown up like Topsy, and they're needing streamlining. And so they're in the process of doing exactly that. And so the enhanced village centers would be an addition to their work also. And both of those reports are due at the end of the year and or the beginning of next year. And so in some ways, we also didn't want to get the cart before the horse.
Those are the existing reports that are going on?
Yes, those are existing reports right now that are being worked on. And you can find out, I'm pretty sure DHCD's is, Chris Cochran will know when he's spearheading that. And Sabina will obviously know, but I think that one's due in January, and the streamlining of the designated areas is due sometime in this fall.
And then we shared this.
Oh, yes.
Do y'all all have a copy? This is really good.
I assume you all got copies of this.
Oh, yes, just so we're talking the same language.
Also, a wonderful sheet that Chris gave us that we can send to you is a sheet with all the designated areas and what's possible in each one, which is also a very useful sheet, which I can send you, which was very helpful. So, any questions before we let you get at this?
Yeah, without,
Sorry, I hope that's what you wanted.
Past paid family leave today, right?
Do we what?
Past paid family leave already today.
Oh, yeah, we
Okay, that's all.
we just whizzed through it.
Good.
Excellent.
Yeah, then we'll pass this out tomorrow. No, one question, I mean, there's many questions to have, and I think, again, for the committee, you know, we will be splitting this up between us and and energy and environment. There's definitely, as you mentioned at the beginning, there is definitely well, you didn't mention it this way, but there is a stricter boundary line between us and energy and environment when it comes to working on the zoning stuff and understanding. That doesn't mean we're not going to understand it or take testimony on it, but there is a limitation on where we will do any kind of deeper work on the zoning stuff. So that's just, we'll be focusing primarily on the housing sections. And again, we can make the argument that all of this is housing, but it's land use and, but the question I had, again, trying to ignore the kind of the day by day scorekeeping that was happening in the press, where some people supported the bill today, they didn't support it tomorrow, and you know, I don't know whether they're back on board or what have you. We'll hear plenty. But when I think about what is proposed here, designated downtowns are obviously in more densely populated areas. They have water and sewer. And the idea of, say, village character, which is a hugely Vermont thing, it's also very exclusive in many ways. I'm just curious if you can give us an overview of what you think. Every town thinks that they're special, and they are.
They are.
Totally.
And yet we're not unique. You know, the issues that a Waterbury may have may be slightly different than what Woodstock has, but they're essentially the same. It's like, how are we going to build more housing in an area that's served by a water sewer connection? I'm just curious, like, how did that all wash out in terms of what you heard? Not generally from VLCT, but just what did you hear from towns in terms of how would they build up their downtowns? How would they approach not in the village character? How would they approach height restrictions or whatever may be in the mix here? Can you talk about that at all? Just
Yeah. The one, I think she was from Waterbury, actually.
We had a bunch of planners.
We had
mostly.
lots of planners who didn't all agree, which is perfectly fine. Folks do agree that there's a high demand on walkable communities. That people, young people, older people want to live in places where you can walk, where there's sidewalks, hopefully transit, biking. Those places are more valuable. Some of the planners were frustrated that it was difficult to get things approved when the neighbors didn't want them. So that's why we did some of what we did, parking regulations. And it's important to remember that all this housing doesn't have to be newly built. And in fact, it's really good if we can renovate and preserve our current housing, especially in the older cities or towns, you know, where we have the really nice urban structure, like Bellows Falls is what I'm thinking of. That's what I'm familiar with. Places like that where there are houses that are falling down. And if we can preserve those houses, which the VHIP program does, on an average cost of, I think it was $36,000 per unit, which is a third at the most of what it costs to build a new unit. If we can preserve those properties, then that not only gives you more housing, but it also preserves the character of the area and raises the property values all around you. So we don't have to just build. I think Kate just said, or Senator Rahm, that 20% of the housing is in need of work. So there's a lot of opportunities.
I also think that we really embraced our smart growth value, which this state has underscored in terms of its policy value for a long time. And so this bill supports that value. And I think every one of each town has to decide what it wants to look at. What we did discover was that we have the largest lot size in the country in Vermont, and that we aren't doing as much with those lot sizes as we might, hence our duplexing by right and our being able to build up to 5 units, housing units in areas that are served by water and sewer. That's a lot of additional housing in our downtowns, which is possible. So I think that each town's going to obviously have to make up their own minds about how they want to grow and where they want to grow and what additional designation areas they want to pursue. But it's, there is a lot of commercial space, as Wendy said, a lot of commercial space in our downtowns. I mean, in Woodstock, we have second, third, and fourth floors often in buildings that are not actually very well used. We're not using the space we have up to its highest capacity at the moment. So we're hoping.
Yeah, and we looked at incentives to help folks convert from commercial to residential with fewer permits.
So I don't know if going back to the water and sewer, in my area, there's a town that has sewer but not water, and a town that has water but not sewer. But what you were looking at was water and sewer. Any consideration of?
Yes, there is, and you'll find out from Ellen, there are sections that say water or sewer, and I can't remember.
And they're different.
And
right.
they it doesn't all require both. And this, I found my designated sheet. I'll send this to you, but this has what's available, what the opportunities are in each designated area, which is useful because as we start looking at all of them. But that's the value that really drove this work, was increasing density, creating new opportunities to do that.
And it is water and sewer in the 5-unit areas, but there are other places in the bill where it's or.
Right.
And I know that there's definitions for all of these things in the bill, but 5 units per acre, is that, I mean, I live in a lot that's a third of an acre. But are you talking about 5 separate homes, or are you talking about a 5-plex building?
I think people will be able to use their imaginations. I mean, they can be duplexes, they can be 5 housing units per acre. They could be separate, they could be separate or combined. I don't believe we differentiate.
No, it's right. It's,
do we? We don't.
No, we say it's either one.
Not sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's what
my understanding is, it's either. It can be like you could have 3 and 2, or you could have an older house that has been renovated to have 5 units. And 5 units per acre is really not that much.
Nope.
I mean, it doesn't feel
in New York,
dense.
there are hundreds.
Well,
hundreds.
yeah, but other than New York. Yeah.
New York has brought
Yeah. Yeah, and we're trying to get good samples of areas that we can point out, because we don't yet have a good solid presentation of what we've done, because we still don't have the final bill. And I think it's really important that we have that. Especially before you guys start your
We'll
work.
get an understanding of it. I mean, we can all think generally. I mean, every town is,
every town
has been built differently, whether it's quarter-acre lots or in my case, third of it. Not all of the lots on my street are third of an acre lots, but I can assume that if I put 3 houses together and maybe half of a fourth, that's an acre. But at any rate, we'll figure that out and, or we'll learn more about it. And again, just there is going to be a delineation in our work between strictly housing material and then this adjunct for zoning and whatnot. But we need to understand it as well, because I'm immediately thinking of, well, if you have 5 units on 1 acre, you need to have, according to this, 5 parking spots. And is that 5 parking spots on the street? Is that 5 parking? I mean, we'll ask all those questions. We'll ask all those questions of Ellen Jakowski and the other housing folks. Yes.
Thank you. Going back up to where you talked about, let's say before the zoning, and you talked about for parking, you were talking about eviction, the
eviction fund, the eviction rescue fund.
The eviction rescue fund. Did you talk at all about rescuing people from foreclosure?
We, as you'll recall from last year's housing, the VHFA had a program using ARPA money for that. And we did not talk about foreclosure. We didn't. And that's something you could raise with Maura. I don't know where that work stands right now, but I know she's very interested in that.
Okay, thank you.
The other ingredient for our conversation committee will be, there may or may not be ARPA money, ARPA funds made available. There will be, I think, a study or an update on ARPA funds that might be available, which will change some of our funding decisions that we've made as well. Could change some of our funding decisions for some of these projects as well, depending on A, if there's any money available, and B, you know, how it would get expended. But that's just, we won't know, we're gonna react to that because we have no idea if that's gonna happen. All right, thank you. This is very difficult. I think there's a lot of difficult things in this work that you've done on it so far. And
We got it started. You guys get to take the next stab at it.
well, it just goes to the notion of public policy and then versus private property. That's a big part of this conversation, and just or a lens to look at some of these things through. And how do we provide, what role does the state have in providing these tools to kind of alleviate the pressure on the housing shortages?
Right.
So,
And what can the state ask for public money in return? Well, you know, what are our expectations?
right, you know, is it enough to just have a new house on our new, 47 new homes? Is that enough, or do we need to have some kind of cycling in and out of our investments? And we had those conversations earlier this year in preparation.
And last year we had that conversation as we introduced the Missing Middle program that the VHFA spearheaded, and we required that 20% of them be perpetually affordable. That wasn't initially, so I think all the time we use public money, we want to make sure we are getting a public benefit going that goes on into perpetuity.
Okay, yes.
Speaking of which, is the Missing Middle Rent Stabilization Program in your bill that the NRC was talking about, where they basically supply like up to a third of like 0 to 3% money? We heard about it.
VHFA, yeah.
That's the
VHFA, what is
revolving, is that the revolving loan fund? That's the revolving.
Yeah, but I think it's under the Missing Middle Rental Revolving Loan.
The Missing Middle is a home ownership.
She didn't call it that, but she did mention it. 65% of AMI to 100.
Yeah, that's what I just did, to 110%.
So that's in it?
Yeah, but that's a rental program. The Missing
No, I
Middle
know.
is a home ownership program.
That's not.
At some point, it had been
It is,
called
yeah.
a Missing Middle Program for renting.
Yeah,
right? So
because it
there's the
doesn't-
Missing Middle for purchasing, and that program you're referring to, maybe it's not being called that anymore, but at one point, I was pretty sure it was called a kind of Missing Middle Rent Revolving Loan Stabilization, because it was supposed to put more affordable rentals in the market.
The revolving loan fund is for more middle income people, yes. The Missing Middle, what she's called, I think it's inappropriate. It's a middle income housing program for home ownership to create more available units.
No, I get it.
Yeah, that are home ownership. But the revolving loan fund is definitely designed for middle income people up to 110% of AMI.
Then the VHCB money is what gives you the real affordable
Yes.
house.
No, we'll
It's a lot.
we'll dissect this and, a lot of our work in the first half of the year has been.
Giving you lots to work with. There's a lot in this bill.
Well, there's a lot of
Enjoy
money in the budget that we're sending you, and that matches your policies, so.